The vast, deep expanse of the Black Sea, once a bustling international thoroughfare, had become a contested battleground, a murky domain where the subtle machinations of electronic espionage held power equal to, if not greater than, the force of conventional weaponry. At the heart of this electronic conflict was a single, highly specialized Russian ship, an intelligence-gathering vessel whose silent presence was steadily tightening a silent stranglehold around Ukraine's most innovative and vital military operation, the deployment of naval attack drones. This Russian spy ship was not designed for direct combat, lacking the heavy missile batteries of a frigate or the massive cannons of a cruiser. Its true power lay in its sensitive, sophisticated electronic intelligence arrays, specifically the R381T system. This network of antennas and sensors was capable of logging faint radio transmissions, charting the paths of low-flying aircraft, and most crucially, cataloging the electronic emissions, speed profiles, and operational patterns of Ukraine's growing fleet of naval drones. For 6 continuous weeks, the spy ship had maintained its station approximately 15 miles off the coast of Novorossiysk, a position of strategic significance that allowed its arrays to monitor a critical sector of the Black Sea where Ukrainian maritime activity was most pronounced. Its mission was not to sink vessels, but to predict them. Its objective was to gather enough data, a pattern of life, in intelligence terminology, to allow Russian forces to anticipate the next drone strike, targeting the moment of launch or the designated route with preemptive strikes. The ships are 381T arrays, which constantly listen across a broad spectrum of frequencies, were logging a daily ritual, the subtle spikes in radio traffic preceding a launch, the speed and altitude maintained during the transit, and the evasion maneuvers programmed into the drone's rudimentary guidance systems. This massive, meticulously gathered dataset was nearing completion. The intelligence analysts aboard the spy ship were only days away from finalizing a comprehensive predictive model that would allow the Russian Black Sea Fleet to neutralize entire waves of drone attacks before they could even reach their targets. The success of the spy ship was directly leading to the strangulation of Ukraine's naval drone operations, forcing Ukrainian commanders to launch in smaller numbers, from more remote, less convenient locations, and under increasingly desperate circumstances. The mere existence of this intelligence asset was shifting the tactical advantage decisively toward the Russian side, threatening to render Ukraine's most asymmetric and successful weapon ineffective. The ship, sitting quietly in the inky darkness, represented a threat far greater than any conventional naval blockade. It was an intellectual blockade, threatening to blind Ukraine's innovative eyes on the sea. The patrol had been relatively quiet, characterized by the monotonous logging of data and the patient charting of faint electronic echoes. But this calm, this meticulous, slow-burning success was moments away from being shattered. The Ukrainian military understood the existential threat posed by this vessel and, in a high-stakes gamble of deception and technological daring, had committed a small, highly specialized team to a mission of unparalleled risk, aiming to destroy the precise intelligence that was designed to destroy their very capability to fight at sea. The spy ships or 381T arrays continued their tireless vigil, listening, logging, and waiting, unaware that the quiet data they were gathering was about to be obliterated by the very threat they were designed to extinguish. The fate of Ukraine's naval campaign now rested on the success of a desperate, low-altitude gamble against the most advanced electronic ears in the Black Sea. The attack against a Russian intelligence vessel was not a massive, broad-front assault designed to overwhelm, but precise, surgical strike dependent entirely upon stealth, speed, and exploiting the core weaknesses of a system engineered for entirely different threats. The operation commenced precisely at 0223 hours, a moment chosen not by chance, but by a deep understanding of the enemy's established patrol patterns and crew duty cycles. 3 specialized Ukrainian FP-1 drones lifted off from a concealed location, immediately vectoring toward the open water. These were not the larger, more conventional aluminum-hulled aircraft that Russian radar systems were designed to detect. These were FP-1 drones, small, fast, and engineered with a single, overriding mandate: invisibility. The rush to launch these specific assets was dictated by a rapidly closing window of opportunity and a dire, immediate threat, an urgency that propelled the small team into a high-stakes, almost frantic scramble to clear the launch zone. The target was a Russian spy ship, sitting 15 miles off Novorossiysk, whose 381T arrays were, at that very moment, listening patiently for any sign of maritime activity. The mission was a race against time, not only against the closing intelligence gap aboard the spy ship, but also against the immediate threat of a retaliatory strike on the launch site itself, a threat that was very real and actively materializing. The three FP-1 drones were launched at their maximum possible speed, a blistering 180 kilometers per hour, ensuring that their transit time across the monitored waters would be minimized, reducing the precious seconds available for human operators to react to an ambiguous radar contact. The defining characteristic of these three Vanguard drones, the very element that turned them from simple vehicles into stealth assets, was their low-altitude flight profile. The operators set the autopilot for a daringly low altitude, skimming just 3 meters above the waves. This low-altitude flight was a deliberate, calculated risk that immediately put the drones into what radar operators call ground clutter, where the chaotic, noisy returns from the sea waves create so much interference that they effectively mask small, low-flying objects. But the speed and low altitude were merely the physical manifestations of the stealth design. The true genius lay in material composition of the drones themselves, a fundamental design choice that rendered them invisible to systems designed to track metallic aircraft. This Vanguard was not just flying low. It was, for all intents and purposes, flying blind to the enemy's most critical detection systems, making their 0223 launch the silent beginning of a highly complex and dangerous operation designed to cut the throat of Russia's electronic eye on the Black Sea. The fate of Ukraine's future maritime campaign now rested on whether these three small, fast ghosts could successfully penetrate the vast, dark expanse of monitored water, evading the listening R-381T arrays and the constant, roving patrols of Russian reconnaissance aircraft, all while the ship continued its patient, silent work of mapping the patterns of life that were designed to end the war at sea. The very essence of the attack's success was engineered into the material science of the FP-1 drones themselves, a tactical decision that prioritized low-technology simplicity over high-technology complexity. The strategic use of plywood. In a world dominated by aluminum alloys, advanced composites, and radar-absorbing paints, the FP-1 drones, built primarily from plywood, offered a crude yet devastatingly effective form of stealth. This was the plywood advantage, a deliberate choice that created a radar cross-section smaller than a seagull, rendering the drones essentially invisible to sophisticated systems designed to track aluminum aircraft. Modern naval radar, especially systems like the mineral me used by Russian patrol boats, operates on the assumption of metallic targets. These systems are finely tuned to look for the sharp, angular returns, the crisp, distinct electronic echoes that metallic surfaces produce. Aluminum, being highly conductive, offers a perfect, bright electronic signature. Wood, however, is a dielectric material. It absorbs and disperses radar energy. The result is a mushy, inconsistent, and extremely faint return that automated tracking algorithms are programmed to discard as environmental noise. For all intents and purposes, the three FP-1 drones were radar ghosts, a phenomenon that would lead Russian operators to dismiss their presence as mere ground clutter or probable birds. This low-tech construction also played a critical role in the second, equally important domain of stealth, thermal signature. As the drones skimmed 3 meters above the cool Black Sea waves, their plywood construction acted as a natural insulator. Unlike aluminum, which rapidly transfers heat from the engine and internal electronics to the surface, the plywood frame cooled quickly. This meant that the external temperature of the drone was rapidly dropping to match the temperature of the surrounding sea and air. In the world of thermal detection, where advanced cameras are designed to spot minute differences in temperature as little as 2 degrees Celsius, the FP-1s were actively working to achieve thermal homogeneity with their environment. Their sudden disappearance from the thermal display of the Russian forepost, our reconnaissance drone, was a direct result of this simple material choice. The operator, Viewing a low-altitude object whose heat signature quickly blended into the dark background of the sea, we have no choice but to classify the object as a non-threat, completing the cycle of invisibility. The FP-1S were not just fast, they were intentionally cheap. The cost of a plywood drone, lacking complex radar-absorbing materials or advanced metallic hulls, was negligible compared to the cost of the single depth charge used by a Russian helicopter. This low cost allowed them to be viewed as throwaway assets, expendable tools that could be risked in the most high-stakes operations. The plywood advantage was a fundamental challenge to the massive investment Russia had placed in high-end surveillance and tracking technology. It was a lesson in asymmetric warfare, proving that sometimes the most effective countermeasure against complex, expensive detection systems is a deliberate return to simple, overlooked materials, creating a perfect blind spot in the enemy's most advanced electronic eyes. The early stages of the FP-1 Vanguard's transit were not without challenge, encountering the watchful scrutiny of the Black Sea's constant aerial surveillance. Approximately 20 minutes after the FP-1S launched, a significant threat materialized on the horizon: a Russian forepost or reconnaissance drone. This drone was a sophisticated piece of Israeli-designed technology, operating on a standard racetrack patrol pattern approximately 30 kilometers off the Ukrainian coast. Its primary mission was continuous, high-fidelity intelligence gathering, making it the most immediate and dangerous threat to the low-flying FP-1S. The forepost was equipped with a Canadian-made MX-15DI camera, a multi-sensor system of astonishing capability. This camera's electro-optical channel could spot a basketball at a distance of 5 kilometers, providing an unparalleled level of visual detail. More critically for the FP-1S, its thermal channel was incredibly sensitive, designed to detect temperature differences as slight as 2 degrees Celsius. Against a cool, uniform background of the pre-dawn sea, any engine heat, exhaust plume, or surface friction could instantly betray the presence of a small vessel. At 0245 hours, the thermal channel of the forepost registered the first unambiguous sign of the FP-1S. The lead FP-1's engine heat spiked briefly, a momentary flare that was captured on the forepost R's display. The thermal camera identified 3 small contacts at low altitude, heading east at 180 kilometers per hour. The initial spike was a consequence of the FP-1S maximizing engine output for speed, a necessary risk of the rush launch, which momentarily overcame the insulating properties of the plywood. The Russian operator, alerted by the system, immediately zoomed in on the contacts, his primary objective being to classify the targets. The high speed and low altitude suggested military assets, but their size was anomalous. The brief thermal spike was followed by a rapid cooling, as the drone's low-tech design began to mitigate the heat signature. The operator would have been attempting to cycle through the camera's different modes, electro-optical for shape and color, and thermal for heat, to ascertain the exact nature of the contacts. This brief window of detection was the FP-1S moment of highest vulnerability. The powerful MX-15DI camera had done its job perfectly, spotting the minute thermal difference against a vast, cold sea. Had the operator been more experienced with a specific type of low-altitude, low-signature target, or had the contact lasted longer, the mission would have ended then and there. The next move, however, was not up to human operator, but to the FP-1S pre-programmed evasion system, designed to take advantage of the very physical characteristics of the Black Sea environment and the limitations of radar, ensuring that the momentary capture of their heat signature was exactly that, momentary. The pressure was now on the FP-1S to disappear before the forepost operator could transition from classification to a coordinated response, a task that required them to exploit the same sea environment that had just almost betrayed them. The brief, perilous detection by the forepost reconnaissance drone triggered an immediate and critical response coded into the FP-1S rudimentary guidance systems, the pre-programmed evasion maneuver. This maneuver was not a complex, high-G tactical turn. It was a simple, yet highly effective, tactical descent designed to exploit a known physical limitation of maritime radar known as ground clutter. The moment the FP-1S threat receivers registered the close range, powerful radar painted forepost R, the drones dropped instantly to 2 meters above the water. This single meter of altitude reduction was the difference between intermittent visibility and complete invisibility. The chaotic returns from the surface waves, especially in the variable conditions of the Black Sea, are a constant problem for radar operators. The returns are messy, inconsistent, and often brighter than the return from a small, non-metallic drone. Ground clutter is a phenomenon where the radar beams, striking the crests and troughs of the waves, generate a powerful, random noise floor that effectively masks the returns of low-flying objects. By dropping their altitude, the FP-1S plunge themselves directly into this electronic chaos. To the Russian radar operators viewing their consoles, the FP-1S faint returns were instantly lost, swallowed by the overwhelming, random noise generated by the sea state. The operator would have seen the 3 small contacts rapidly descend and then vanish, their signal too weak to compete with the chaotic returns from waves that form a protective electronic blanket over low-flying objects. This tactic proved decisive not only for radar, but also for thermal detection. While the initial drop into the clutter addressed the radar vulnerability, the design and material science of the FP-1S simultaneously addressed the thermal threat. The plywood construction, having initially spiked in temperature due to the rapid launch, now served its intended purpose. Within minutes of the altitude drop and the subsequent stabilization of engine output, the plywood frames had cooled to match the sea temperature. This transition was the final nail in the coffin of the four-post detection capability. To the drone's thermal camera, the FP-1S had achieved perfect thermal homogeneity, effectively vanishing. The operator, having lost contact in the clutter and seeing no compelling heat signature, made the crucial, fatal error of dismissing the evidence. The contacts were logged simply as possible birds, and the forepost continued its predictable racetrack pattern. This dismissal was a testament to the success of the multi-layered evasion strategy, using low altitude to defeat radar and low-tech material to defeat thermal sensors. The simplicity of the FP-1 design had proven superior to the complexity of the forepost R's advanced surveillance suite, confirming that the most effective stealth is often not about defeating physics, but about exploiting the assumptions programmed into enemies' most expensive machines. The FP-1 Vanguard had successfully cleared the first, most dangerous electronic barrier, but behind them, the very urgency of their launch was about to be tragically confirmed. The FP-1's successful evasion of the forepost was a masterclass in low-tech counter-surveillance, with the thermal trick proving the single, most critical factor that allowed the Russian operator to dismiss the threat. The problem for the forepost was one design assumption. Its thermal imaging system, the Canadian-made MX-15DI, was engineered to find hot engines, war metal, and exhaust plumes, the signature of aluminum aircraft and warships. It was not programmed to deal with targets that intentionally sought thermal neutrality with their environment. The FP-1S, having dropped their altitude to 2 meters above the water, were rapidly subjected to the cooling effect of the cold Black Sea air, particularly in the hours before dawn. The plywood frames of the drones were the key element. Plywood is an excellent insulator, preventing the heat generated by the small, fast-running gasoline engine from rapidly transferring to the drone's external surfaces. This meant that the external surface temperature could quickly shed any residual heat spikes from the initial rapid acceleration. As the FP-1S skimmed the waves, the cold air and the spray acted as a natural cooling mechanism, causing the plywood frames to rapidly shed their heat until their surface temperature was a near-perfect match for the temperature of the surrounding sea. This state of thermal homogeneity was the ultimate stealth defense. To the four-post highly sensitive thermal camera, which could detect a 2 degrees Celsius difference, the drone simply faded into the dark, uniform temperature of the sea background. They had not been hit by electronic jamming. They had simply vanished from the thermal spectrum. The operator, already struggling to maintain a radar lock due to ground clutter, Chapter 5, now faced a thermal image with no compelling heat signature. His training dictated that a fast-moving, high-threat military target would have a clear, bright thermal signature, the exhaust of a fast boat, the engine cowling of a military aircraft. What he saw instead was a sea, dark and cold, with a momentary return that faded to nothing. The psychological impact of this thermal trick was profound. Lacking clear visual confirmation or a persistent heat signature, the operator's natural inclination would be to look for the most plausible non-threat explanation. Given the small, low-altitude profile, the contacts were easily rationalized as possible birds. This was a fatal moment of complacency. A massive, advanced reconnaissance drone, capable of spotting a basketball at 5 kilometers, was defeated by the simple, insulating property of wood. The operator, logging the contact as benign, unwittingly allowed the vanguard of the attack, 3 small, fast, highly dangerous vessels, to continue their mission unopposed. The success of the thermal trick confirmed that the simplest forms of deception, those that challenge the fundamental assumptions of detection technology, are often the most devastatingly effective in modern asymmetric warfare, setting the stage for the next critical phase of the operation. The ultimate success of the FP-1 Vanguard's transit hinged not on the technological failure of the Russian systems, but on the human decision made under conditions of ambiguity. The moment the propulsor operator, battling the electronic noise and fading thermal returns, dismissed the threat by logging the contacts as probable birds. This was the moment of unwitting failure, a lapse in judgment born of predictable military doctrine and a lack of experience with a specific type of low-signature threat. The operator was tasked with monitoring a vast, silent expanse of water, a duty characterized by monotony and the constant presence of false positives from wave clutter and actual bird life. His mental model for classifying a high-speed military asset was clear. It must be metallic for strong radar returns, it must be hot for clear thermal signatures, and it must maintain a consistent, recognizable track. The FP-1S violated all 3 of these assumptions simultaneously. When the contacts appeared on his display, they were fleeting. The radar return, already weak due to the plywood construction, was instantly swallowed by the ground clutter when the drones dropped altitude. The thermal return, having spiked briefly, cooled rapidly until the frames reached thermal neutrality with the sea. The operator was left with a record of something small, low, and fast that vanished without a trace and refused to give off a clear thermal lock. In a high-stakes environment where every confirmed target demands an immediate, resource-intensive response, like launching helicopters or vectoring fighter jets, the operator's training compelled him toward caution against false alarms. Raising an alarm over 3 probable birds could lead to disciplinary action if the response proved futile. The systemic bias favored dismissing the anomalous contact and returning to the known, predictable patterns of surveillance. The operator, therefore, made the most rational decision available under his programmed assumptions. He marked the fleeting contacts as probable bird and returned to his standard patrol of the vast, quiet sea. This decision was the unwitting failure that guaranteed the attack's continuation. By dismissing the FP-1S, he had not only failed to stop the Vanguard, but had also deprived the entire Russian defense network of crucial early warning intelligence. The FP-1S were the leading edge of a much larger, more complex operation, and the few minutes of warning their confirmed detection would have provided were now lost. The operator's doubt, rooted in the unexpected simplicity and material composition of the FP-1S, allowed the attack to slip through the net. He continued his patrol, faithfully logging the standard pattern of life in the Black Sea, unaware that it just allowed the single most consequential deviation from that pattern to pass underneath his advanced, yet fundamentally fooled, surveillance drone. The FP-1S had successfully leveraged the technological sophistication of their adversary against itself, proving that the most effective stealth technology is the one that forces a human element to question its own highly reliable data. The perilous, high-speed launch of the 3 FP-1 Vanguard drones was not a leisurely operation, but a rushed launch, born of immediate necessity and extreme danger. The reason for their hasty departure became tragically clear just minutes after the drones cleared the area. Russian intelligence had successfully located the launch site, and a devastating retaliatory strike was inbound. This event confirmed the existential threat posed by the Russian spy ship's intelligence gathering, demonstrating that its pattern of life analysis was already bearing deadly fruit, even if the final predictive model was not yet complete. The launch site, a concealed, temporary position on the Ukrainian coast, was obliterated by a flight of Russian Shahed drones. These slow-moving, long-range loitering munitions, each carrying a heavy 50-kilogram warhead, were a destructive response based on intelligence likely derived from signal triangulation or an earlier aerial reconnaissance mission. The Ukrainian operators, who had been scrambling to launch the 3 FP-1S, barely escaped the area. The drone operators, having completed their mission of sending the Vanguard on its way, were forced to abandon their position, watching as the Shahids arrived and turned their remaining communications equipment, guidance systems, and support vehicles into scrap metal. This event underscored the sheer, immediate danger of their work and highlighted the critical importance of the spy ship mission. The Russian intelligence network, even without the final predictive model, was already tightening the noose, proving that continued, open operation of the naval drone program was becoming untenable. The loss of the launch site and destruction of the equipment were a severe, though not crippling, blow. The operators had survived, and the 3 FP-1S, the most critical assets, were already in the air, heading toward the spy ship. This confirmed to the Ukrainian command that the window of opportunity was rapidly closing. The FP-1 mission was not just an attack of opportunity, but an attack of survival, a desperate attempt to destroy the enemy's intelligence capability before it could fully neutralize their own. The success of the FP-1S was now inextricably linked to the survival of the entire naval drone program. If the spy ship could not be neutralized, the relentless, accurate strikes on launch sites would continue, eventually suffocating the entire operation. The frantic, high-stakes nature of the operation was thus confirmed in a cloud of smoke and debris. The FP-1S were not only flying toward their target, but also flying to protect the very operational existence of the Ukrainian naval campaign. The survival of the operators and the loss of their equipment provided a chilling backdrop to the silent, invisible flight of the FP-1 Vanguard, making the urgency of their mission clear to all who understood the full cost of Russian intelligence. The Russian spy ship, the ultimate target of the FP-1 Vanguard, represented a critical strategic threat because of its prolonged, meticulous operation over the previous 6 weeks, a sustained period of intelligence gathering that had created an impending crisis for the Ukrainian military. The ship's mission was not about a quick tactical strike, but about accumulating enough data to create a comprehensive, predictive model of Ukraine's naval drone operations, setting the intelligence clock ticking toward 0 hour for the FP-1 program. For 6 weeks, the vessel had sat 15 miles off Novorossiysk, its 381 TRAs tirelessly collecting patterns of life. This involved logging every electronic emission, every faint radio spike, every radar-detected track, and every time-stamped visual confirmation of a Ukrainian drone launch. The intelligence gathered was multi-layered, included the drone's typical launch times, their preferred routes, their average speed, the specific radio frequencies they use for initial communication, and the precise altitude they maintain to exploit ground clutter. The R381 TRAs were so sensitive they could also log the subtle harmonics, the ghost frequencies created by the electronic circuits of the drones, creating an electronic fingerprint for each type of asset. This patient, methodical accumulation of data was placing the Russian forces days away from achieving a decisive tactical breakthrough. The intelligence analysts aboard the ship were on the verge of confirming a precise, predictable pattern of strikes. Once that pattern was established, Russian commanders could anticipate launches hours in advance, allowing them to redeploy helicopters for preemptive sweeps, vector fast patrol boats to intercept routes, strike the launch sites with crippling accuracy before the drones could even clear the area. The spy ship was effectively building a kill chain for the Ukrainian drone program, a chain where every link, from launch to target approach, would be predictable and thus vulnerable. The intelligence clock was ticking down to the moment when the spy ship's predictive model was complete. The FP-1 mission was a direct, desperate attempt to smash that clock before it could strike zero. The value of the information gathered over those 6 weeks was immense, It represented a strategic asset far more valuable than any physical warship, as it gave Russia the ability to neutralize Ukraine's most innovative military advantage. The destruction of the ship and its 381T arrays was not just about sinking a vessel. It was about destroying 6 weeks of irreplaceable, meticulously gathered intelligence, the very patterns that would have ended Ukraine's drone war. The FP-1S, flying low and fast, were racing against the intelligence clock, knowing that their mission was the only thing standing between continued viability of the naval drone program and its imminent, predictable end. With the 3 FP-1 Vanguard drones well underway, a second, far larger element of the operation was initiated at 0330 hours, marking the beginning of the crucial deception phase. This phase was designed not to attack, but to trick Russia into leaving their most valuable intelligence asset, the spy ship, completely defenseless by luring away its air cover. While the FP-1S continued their silent, high-speed run toward Novorossiysk, 20 Ukrainian naval drones launched towards Sevastopol at a slower speed of 80 kilometers per hour. This was the decoy swarm, and its objective was to simulate the largest naval drone assault since the famous October 2022 attack on Sevastopol, leveraging historical precedent and overwhelming numbers to force a massive Russian defensive reaction. The decoys themselves were not advanced, purpose-built attack drones. They were a carefully curated mix of modified jet skis and cheap commercial boats, retrofitted with basic guidance systems and electronic signatures designed to mimic the more advanced Mired V5 naval drones. Each decoy cost less than $10,000, making them expendable assets or throwaway assets, whose strategic value lay entirely in their ability to look exactly like a high-threat target on a radar screen. The deception had to be perfect. The swarm maintained a consistent formation, transmitted the specific radio signatures known to be used by armed drones, and moved at a speed that suggested a determined, imminent attack. To Russian radar operators watching their screens, this was a massive, conventional threat, demanding an immediate maximum effort response. The decoy swarm was designed to exploit Russia's adherence to military doctrine, which dictates that the visible, immediate, and mass threat must be neutralized first. The success of the FP-1 mission now depended entirely on the ability of these 20 cheap, expendable boats to pull Russia's primary air defense, the highly effective Ka-27PL anti-submarine helicopters, away from the crucial Novorossiysk sector and commit them to a long-distance hunt for a fleet of ghosts. The launch of the decoy swarm at 0330 hours was the ultimate confirmation of the operation's high-stakes complexity, a simultaneous, two-pronged assault where one element was designed for stealth and destruction and the other for visibility and misdirection. The FP-1S were the silent blade, but the decoy swarm was a loud, insistent hand that guided the enemy's attention elsewhere, setting the stage for the next critical step in the grand plan of deception. The successful execution of the deception required a tactical asset that was not merely numerous, but entirely convincing. The decoy swarm launched towards Sevastopol was an exercise in creating a mirage, transforming cheap, readily available watercraft into the perceived threat of a full-scale naval drone assault. The core of this deceit lay in modifying jet skis and cheap commercial boats to replicate the electronic and physical signatures of genuine military-grade assets, specifically the Mired V5 naval drones, whose profile and speed were well known to Russian intelligence. The choice of platforms, jet skis, and small commercial craft was dictated by cost and expediency. Each vehicle cost less than $10,000, making them expendable or throwaway assets, a crucial consideration for a mission designed to be shot down or stranded. The internal modifications, however, were meticulous. The boats were fitted with basic guidance systems to maintain course and formation, a necessity for a realistic attack profile, and their hulls were augmented with radar-reflective materials placed at specific angles. This augmentation was not designed to make them look like plywood ghosts. It was designed to make them look like metal, generating the strong, crisp returns that Russian naval radar was programmed to expect from high-threat targets. These were not complex systems, but simple radar enhancers placed within the fiberglass and metal structure of the small boats, ensuring that on a distant radar screen, the operator would register the unambiguous signature of an armed drone. Furthermore, the deception extended beyond the physical hull to the electronic signature. Each decoy was equipped with a basic transmitter that broadcast on specific radio frequencies known to be monitored by Russian intelligence and, crucially, known to be used by the genuine Mired V-5S during their operational phases. They were programmed to transmit the right radio signatures, short bursts of data, operational acknowledgments, and control signals at intervals that simulated a coordinated, high-value military network. This simulated traffic was vital for convincing the Russian electronic intelligence, LN systems, including those aboard the spy ship, that a genuine, large-scale operation was underway. The decoys also maintained a consistent formation and moved at an attack speed of 80 kilometers per hour, ensuring that all physical and electronic parameters aligned with the profile of the most dangerous naval threat. The successful transformation of a fleet of jet skis into a convincing naval threat was the ultimate execution of the deception strategy. The mirage was perfect, a large, fast, metallic-looking swarm that was electronically active and headed directly for Sevastopol. This level of realism was necessary to achieve the ultimate goal of the operation, to force the Russian command to commit their most valuable air defense assets to the hunt for a fleet of ghosts, leaving the real target, the spy ship, vulnerable to the true attack. The economic reality of this deception was stunning. A fleet of 20 decoys, costing less than the price of a single depth charge used against them, was set to neutralize the air cover for a multi-million-dollar intelligence vessel, confirming the devastating asymmetrical power of engineered perception. The primary function of the 20 decoys was to create the immediate, overwhelming perception of the largest assault since the famous Sevastopol raid of October 2022. This required generating an electronic illusion so compelling that it would immediately supersede all other intelligence warnings and trigger a maximum effort response from the Russian Black Sea Fleet Command. The success lay in ensuring the decoy swarm produced a convincing radar signature that eliminated all ambiguity and commanded immediate military attention. The key to this conviction was not just the number of contacts, but the quality of the electronic return. The decoy boats were augmented to produce the sharp, high-intensity returns characteristic of metallic, armed naval drones. The simultaneous appearance of 20 such targets moving toward the fleet's main base at Sevastopol was designed to be impossible to ignore. A single or small group of contacts might be dismissed or handled by slow-moving patrol boats, but a swarm of 20 moving at attack speed required the immediate deployment of the fleet's primary anti-drone defense, the air wing. Russian naval radar operators, watching their screens in the pre-dawn hours, would have seen their systems light up with the unmistakable, concentrated threat of a coordinated, large-scale attack. This was no ambiguous contact. The density and speed of the swarm visually commanded the screen. The decoys not only maintained formation, but also transmitted the right radio signatures simultaneously. This electronic chatter, signals traffic, positional reports, and command acknowledgments reinforced a visual radar picture, creating a multi-layered verification of the threat. The intelligence analysts aboard the spy ship and at the Sevastopol Command Center, comparing the radar tracks with their electronic intelligence logs, would find perfect alignment. The speed, the number, and the electronic fingerprint all matched the high-threat profile. Crucially, the decoys were programmed to move at attack speed, maintaining 80 kilometers per hour consistently. Speed is a universal indicator of threat in a naval engagement, and this rapid approach minimized the time available for the Russian command to perform detailed, leisurely analysis. The inherent pressure of an impending major attack forced the admiral to prioritize rapid deployment over careful verification. The goal was to force an immediate, decisive military action, the launch of the air defense helicopters. The decoy swarm was designed to represent the worst-case scenario that the Russian military had historically faced in the Black Sea, a massed, technologically advanced assault. By presenting an immediate and high-fidelity illusion of this existential threat, the decoys ensured that every available defensive asset would be committed to the hunt, confirming that the most convincing radar signature is not necessarily the most technologically complex, but simply the one that most perfectly matches the enemy's deepest fear. The success of this convincing signature was a direct precursor to the withdrawal of air cover and the subsequent exposure of the high-value spy ship. The convincing nature of the decoy swarm was dependent on more than just numbers and speed. It required programming the lie, infusing the fleet with realistic attack patterns that satisfied Russian military doctrine regarding coordinated naval assaults. A haphazard swarm of boats would have been dismissed as disorganized or merely random traffic. The decoys had to behave like an actual, disciplined military force, creating a tactical narrative that the Russian command center would immediately recognize and react to. The Ukrainian operators meticulously controlled the decoys via satellite link for the first 50 kilometers of their transit. This initial human control was crucial for establishing perfect formation and correcting any deviations, ensuring the swarm presented a unified, disciplined front as it entered Russian-monitored waters. After this initial phase, the decoys switched to autopilot, but one loaded with highly realistic, pre-programmed behaviors. These behaviors included following realistic attack patterns, such as spreading into assault formations as they neared the likely defensive perimeter, converging on likely high-value targets within the Sevastopol harbor area, and even performing basic, pre-programmed evasive maneuvers in response to simulated or recorded radar probes. The decoys were designed to look like a disciplined assault force whose behavior was dictated by centralized command and control. This was a critical element of the deception. The Russian command center, viewing the assault on their consoles, would be analyzing the swarm's intent based on its movements. The decoy's behavior, the shift from transit formation to assault wedge, the convergence vectors, would confirm their classification as high-threat, organized military assets. Furthermore, the electronic signature of the swarm was layered with coordinated radio transmissions, simulating command chatter and positional acknowledgments that aligned perfectly with the shifting formations. These simulated communications were designed to sound like genuine operational traffic, verifying the swarm's intelligence through the airwaves. The decoys were also programmed to broadcast on frequencies known to be monitored by Russian intelligence. This ensured that the intelligence being transmitted, the lie, was being actively collected and logged by the very systems designed to uncover it. This was not a passive deception. It was an active flooding of the enemy's intelligence channels with convincing misinformation. The successful programming of the lie, the intricate choreography of the 20 decoys, transformed the fleet from a mere collection of boats into a fully credible, organized naval threat. This realistic attack pattern was a necessary final step in convincing the Russian admiral to commit his most valuable assets to the hunt, confirming that strategic deception is as much about satisfying the enemy's expectations as it is about concealment. To complete the comprehensive illusion of a high-threat, military-grade assault, the decoys had to overcome the final layer of Russian defense: thermal imaging. The naval assault helicopters and reconnaissance aircraft relied heavily on infrared sensors to distinguish genuine threats from simple clutter or random vessel traffic, especially at night. The solution lay in the infrared mimic, fitting the cheap, throwaway assets with basic heat sources to replicate the infrared signature of armed drones and fast-moving combat vessels. While the FP-1 Vanguard relied on cooling their plywood frames to achieve invisibility, the decoys swarm needed to achieve the exact opposite: maximum visibility and heat emissivity. This required simple yet effective thermal augmentation. Each jet ski and commercial boat was fitted with internal or external heat sources, likely small, inexpensive heating elements or chemical heat packs positioned near the exhaust or propulsion systems. These heat sources were designed to mimic the infrared signature of armed drones, creating a distinct, bright thermal profile that would instantly attract the attention of the thermal cameras aboard the Ka-27PL helicopters and other surveillance aircraft. The helicopter's thermal vision would lock onto these heat blooms, confirming the contacts as genuine, high-threat military assets rather than cold, benign fishing boats. The deception was tailored to specific threat profiles. A fast-moving combat drone generates significant heat from its engine and hull friction, and the deliberate creation of a similar thermal bloom provided the necessary visual confirmation for the helicopter crews. Furthermore, the sheer density of the heat sources, 20 strong infrared profiles all moving towards Sevastopol, created an overwhelming thermal picture. For a thermal operator scanning the horizon, the scene would look like a massive, heat-generating military formation, reinforcing perception of a major naval assault. The low cost of the heat sources, coupled with the low cost of the commercial boats, meant that the thermal mimic was achieved with maximum efficiency and minimum investment. The goal was simple: ensure the helicopter's thermal cameras provided immediate, unambiguous confirmation of a major threat, leaving no room for doubt or hesitation. The success of the infrared mimic was a final psychological lock on the deception. It validated the radar returns, confirmed the electronic signatures, and ensured that the Russian admiral could not wait for daylight or slow-moving patrol boats to verify the threat. The immediate high-fidelity thermal illusion guaranteed the rapid launch of the helicopter fleet, sealing the fate of the spy ship's air cover and setting the stage for the next critical step in the chain of deception. The entire purpose of the decoy swarm was to neutralize the Black Sea's air shield, the fleet of Ka-27PL anti-submarine and naval defense helicopters, by forcing their deployment to the wrong sector. These helicopters were the primary defense against the naval drone threat, and their removal from the Novorossiysk area was the single most critical precondition for the FP-1 Vanguard's success. The Ka-27PL helicopters were uniquely suited to counter the naval drone threat, a capability that no other asset in the Russian Black Sea fleet could match. Ships are inherently too slow to chase fast-moving, low-signature naval drones, especially those moving at speeds up to 180 kilometers per hour. Fighter jets, while fast, cannot hover to search and lack the precision sensors and low-altitude maneuverability required for targeting small craft on the surface. The helicopters, by contrast, could cover over 100 kilometers in 20 minutes, allowing for rapid deployment to any threatened sector. Once on station, they possessed the necessary sensors and weapons to neutralize the threat. Their onboard radar and sophisticated electro-optical systems allowed them to hunt for small surface contacts, and their ability to drop RGB 16 depth charges provided a devastating aerial weapon. These charges, designed to neutralize submarines, could neutralize everything within a 50-meter radius upon impact, making them highly effective against swarms of small, fast-moving surface vessels. Furthermore, the Ka-27PLs were equipped with dipping sonar, providing them with the capability to hunt for underwater drones, giving them a layered defense role that was indispensable to the fleet's overall security architecture. At the time of the decoy launch, the Russian admiral had a total of 10 Ka-27PL helicopters distributed across the key bases, 6 at Novorossiysk and 4 at Sevastopol. The 6 helicopters stationed at Novorossiysk were the critical assets responsible for protecting the Novorossiysk approaches, including the sector where the spy ship was stationed. Without them, the Novorossiysk sea approaches were defenseless against any fast-moving surface threat. The decision to commit these helicopters was the ultimate test of the decoy swarm's effectiveness. The admiral knew that losing control of the skies over Black Sea was an unacceptable risk, and the only force capable of rapidly neutralizing a massive, incoming drone swarm was the Ka-27PL fleet. The successful luring of these helicopters to the west would create a temporary, but total, vacuum and air defense over the spy ship's position, providing the FP-1 Vanguard with a critical, unopposed window it needed to complete its highly dangerous mission. The deployment of the Ka-27PLs was a final, irreversible commitment of resources that confirmed the success of the overall deception plan. The decision by the Russian admiral to launch all 6 Novorossiysk helicopters west toward the decoy swarm was a critical moment of strategic victory for the Ukrainians, demonstrating the effectiveness of the doctrine trap. Russian military doctrine, like most naval doctrine, is built on the fundamental principle of responding to the visible, mass threat first, prioritizing the neutralization of an immediate, high-fidelity attack over the nuanced verification of a potential, low-signature threat. The decoy swarm was designed to exploit this precise doctrine. The decoys created a picture of overwhelming danger. 20 contacts moving fast, broadcasting attack signatures, and approaching the main base at Sevastopol. This was an existential threat demanding maximum, immediate resource commitment. The 6 Ka-27PL helicopters at Novorossiysk were the fastest, most effective response available. To fail to deploy them would have meant risking the devastation of Sevastopol, an unacceptable political and military failure. The Russian admiral was forced to make a binary choice: chase a confirmed, visible threat or risk a potential catastrophe. The low signature, 3-drone FP-1 Vanguard heading toward Novorossiysk, by contrast, was an unconfirmed, ambiguous threat, a theoretical risk that could be managed later by slow-moving patrol boats or dismissed entirely as the probable birds the forepost operator had logged. The doctrine mandated responding to the confirmed, high-value threat. The trap was set perfectly. The admiral's decision was rational within the framework of his military training, but it was fatally flawed because a confirmed threat was a lie. The deployment order was a necessary consequence of the decoy swarm's success in satisfying all the criteria for a major, high-threat assault. The distinctive womp-womp of the 6 Novorossiysk helicopters launching west at 270 kilometers per hour was the sound of the defense perimeter collapsing. Every minute those powerful anti-drone assets flew west was a minute the real drones flew east unopposed, confirming that the most effective strategy against a doctrinal military force is to create an illusion that perfectly aligns with their established rules of engagement. By forcing the admiral to prioritize the defense of Sevastopol against a non-existent threat, the Ukrainians had successfully stripped the spy ship of its only effective, rapid reaction defense. The doctrine trap had secured the critical 2-hour window necessary for the FP-1 Vanguard to complete its lethal approach, demonstrating the immense power of exploiting predictable military assumptions. The commitment of the 6 Novorossiysk Ka-27PL helicopters to the Sevastopol decoy mission transformed the operation into the race west, a high-speed chase that was designed to place the primary air defense assets as far out of position as possible. The 6 helicopters launched immediately, accelerating to their maximum cruise speed of 270 kilometers per hour. The rapid, committed flight confirmed the Russian command's certainty in the validity of the decoy threat and guaranteed the vulnerability of the Novorossiysk sector. The helicopter's primary goal was intercepting the 20 decoys before they reached the heavily defended areas around Sevastopol. The urgency of their mission meant they flew on a direct, high-speed vector, consuming fuel and placing immense distance between themselves and the spy ship they were ostensibly protecting. Every kilometer they traveled west was a victory for the FP-1 Vanguard flying east. The sheer distance they were ordered to cover, over 300 kilometers to reach the engagement zone, was a testament to the scope of the deception. The deployment was an irreversible commitment, as retrieving them quickly would require diverting precious refueling assets or forcing them to return with dangerously low fuel levels. The crucial strategic consequence was the temporal and geographical displacement of the air cover. The helicopters were now placed so far out of position that even if the Russian admiral had instantly realized the deception, the time required for them to return to the spy ship's position was astronomical. They were committed to a 2-hour transit, an engagement, and a 2-hour return, meaning the spy ship was left undefended for a minimum of 4 hours. The successful orchestration of the decoy swarm had forced this full commitment. The distinctive womp-womp of the rotors, which faded quickly as they raced toward the decoys, symbolized a momentary lapse in the spy ship's protective layer. The Russian crews were focused entirely on the high-threat mission of neutralizing the massive swarm, their attention completely diverted from the quiet, low-altitude run of the 3 FP-1s flying toward their home base. The commitment of the air wing was the ultimate sacrifice of the defense perimeter. It confirmed that the lure of the 20 decoys was powerful enough to nullify the presence of the 6 most capable anti-drone platforms in the entire sector. The race west had been won by the decoys before the engagement even began, securing the vital, unopposed window for the main attack to proceed. The immediate, high-speed commitment of the 6 Ka-27PL helicopters solidified the successful execution of the deception, placing the spy ship's air cover in a state of vanishing vulnerability. The goal of the decoy mission was achieved. By the time the helicopters reached the decoy engagement zone, they were a full 360 kilometers out of position relative to the Novorossiysk approaches they were meant to be guarding. This extreme displacement guaranteed that the spy ship would be effectively naked against any incoming threat for critical duration of the FP-1S transit. The geographical reality of the Black Sea and the speed of the helicopters meant that this distance represented an insurmountable temporal barrier to defense. Even if the deception were instantly revealed, the physics of air travel dictated that the helicopters would require a minimum of 2 to 3 hours to return to their station, a window that was precisely calculated into the FP-1 mission's timing. The 6 dedicated anti-drone platforms were now locked into a high-speed hunt for 20 cheap boats, and their absence created a catastrophic vacuum in the defense perimeter. The spy ship, sitting 15 miles off Novorossiysk, now had no air cover. It possessed no quick reaction force capable of intercepting a low-flying, fast-moving threat. Its own organic defense systems, while formidable, were designed for close-in protection and could not substitute for the wide area surveillance and rapid engagement capability of the helicopters. The ship was left with no way to vector helicopters to investigate contacts. The critical quarterbacking role of the intelligence vessel was nullified by the absence of players. The successful luring of the air wing away from the area confirmed the brilliance of the decoy strategy. It exploited the principle that defense resources, once committed, are difficult to recall and redeploy without significant delay. The spy ship's position was now one of extreme, almost existential vulnerability. For the next 2 hours, any drone that managed to penetrate the outer ring of patrol boats would have a clear shot at the high-value intelligence asset, knowing that the Black Sea's air shield was nowhere to be found. The sound of the womp-womp had been replaced by a profound, dangerous silence, confirming that the most effective way to eliminate a defense is often not to destroy it, but simply to lure it so far out of position that it ceases to be a factor in the battle. The FP-1 Vanguard was now flying toward a target whose primary defense had been successfully removed by a fleet of augmented jet skis. The successful displacement of the Ka-27PL helicopters created the critical tactical reality for the FP-1 Vanguard. The spy ship was defenseless, and the attack was now racing against a 2-hour window, the minimum time required for any effective air defense asset to return to the Novorossiysk sector. This window of vulnerability was a direct result of the grand deception and was a singular factor guaranteeing the FP-1S their chance at success. The spy ship's primary mission was electronic intelligence and coordination, not direct, solo combat. Its physical defenses were limited to short-range guns and a protective screen of 2 Project 03160 patrol boats, a standard doctrine implemented since the loss of the Moskva, to prevent surprise surface attacks. However, these patrol boats were slow to react, lacked long-range radar detection, and were utterly dependent on the spy ship's sophisticated R381T arrays and mineral me radar to vector them like a quarterback calling plays. With the air cover gone, the entire defense system was stripped of its rapid reaction capability. The 2-hour window was a gift to the FP-1S. During this period, the drones were flying essentially unopposed transit. They faced the passive threats of fixed radar stations and the low-altitude detection capabilities of the patrol boats, but they were free from the most feared threat: the helicopter's ability to rapidly intercept, hover, confirm, and destroy with area of effect depth charges. The knowledge that they were flying against the clock, knowing that air cover could not possibly return in time, granted the FP-1 operators a significant psychological and tactical advantage. They could focus entirely on exploiting the ground clutter and the radar blind spots without the constant, high-stress threat of an incoming, high-speed aerial interceptor. Furthermore, the absence of the helicopters meant the patrol boats were forced to operate independently, relying on their own, less capable systems. The spy ship could still see farther than the patrol boats, but its commands of the boats would now be reactive, slow, and constrained by the limitations of the boat's speed and detection capabilities. The creation of the 2-hour window was the most crucial element of the entire strategic plan. It confirmed that the Ukrainians understood that the most effective way to disable a high-value asset like the spy ship was not necessarily through force, but through strategic resource denial. By luring the air defense assets hundreds of kilometers away, they ensured that the FP-1's success would be measured solely by their ability to navigate the complex, low-altitude electronic gauntlet, free from the immediate, overwhelming threat of the Black Sea's air shield. The clock was now ticking down to zero, and the spy ship was left to rely on its own limited defenses against a threat it was never designed to face alone. With the spy ship strategically isolated and the defense helicopters committed hundreds of kilometers to the west, the three FP-1 Vanguard drones initiated the next critical phase of their attack, the course adjustment. This was not a random deviation, but a precise, calculated 15-degree northward vector designed to exploit a vulnerability in the Russian fixed radar infrastructure, a weakness discovered through months of meticulous observation of the Novorossiysk approaches. The success of the FP-1's final approach depended entirely on their ability to penetrate the radar fence established by the fixed land-based surveillance systems. The Russians, in their efforts to protect the vital Novorossiysk port and its naval assets, had deployed two key radar stations, likely Plywood K1 radar systems, to cover the surrounding sea sector. These stations were designed to provide overlapping coverage, eliminating blind spots and ensuring continuous tracking of any high-speed surface or aerial threat. However, the Ukrainians had logged the precise operational parameters of these systems. Their months of intelligence gathering, likely involving signals intelligence, SIGINT, and even visual confirmation from overflying drones, had revealed the exact speed of rotation and the timing of the radar sweeps. The intelligence confirmed that each of the two Plywood K1 radar stations rotated at precisely 10 revolutions per minute. This rotation, like two searchlights spinning in circles, created a momentary, periodic gap in coverage. The FP-1's course adjustment was designed to hit the precise geographical point where the sweep patterns of the two radars, at their maximum extent, were momentarily pointing away from the same patch of dark sea. The 15-degree north adjustment directed the drones toward a specific, tiny dark corner, a 2-kilometer corridor that the drones had to hit precisely. The timing had to be perfect. For exactly 4 seconds every minute, the overlapping beams of the two radars would both be pointing away from this corridor, creating a brief, total electronic void. The challenge was immense, requiring the FP-1s to maintain their precise speed and heading to enter this corridor exactly during the 4-second window of vulnerability. The exploitation of the Novorossiysk approaches was a triumph of dedicated signals intelligence over raw technology. The Russians had invested in complex, redundant radar systems, but the Ukrainians had invested in the patient observation of their pattern of life, revealing the single, tiny, fatal window of time and space where those systems were momentarily blind. This course adjustment was a final, high-stakes gamble on the perfection of their intelligence, positioning the FP-1s for the most perilous penetration of the entire mission. The strategic vulnerability in the Russian coastal defense, which the FP-1 Vanguard was now actively exploiting, was rooted in predictable physics of radar rotation, the reality of the spinning searchlights. The two Plywood K1 radar stations covering the critical Novorossiysk approaches operated under a fixed mechanical constraint. They rotated at an exact rate of 10 revolutions per minute. This continuous, predictable sweep created the temporal and spatial gap that the entire FP-1 mission was designed to exploit. Imagine two powerful searchlights mounted on shore, their beams perpetually sweeping across the vast, dark expanse of Black Sea. While the Russian doctrine intended for these two beams to provide seamless, overlapping coverage, the synchronized speed of their rotation meant that for a fleeting period during each minute, a small, specific area of the sea would be left entirely unmonitored. The Ukrainian intelligence, gathered over months of dedicated signals analysis, had mapped the precise moment when the two radar beams, completing their cyclical rotation, would both be pointing away from the same dark corner, the 2-kilometer corridor that the FP-1s were now racing to hit. The physics of this defense system created an inherent, self-imposed limitation. The time required for the antenna to complete a full revolution necessitated a momentary lapse in coverage along a specific azimuthal plane. The key was the exact synchronization of the two separate stations. If the stations were perfectly synchronized, the gap would remain static and predictable. The Ukrainians had banked on the mechanical regularity of the systems, calculating the 4-second window of invisibility that occurred precisely every minute. During this hypercritical 4-second interval, the FP-1 drones, flying at their maximum speed of 180 kilometers per hour, could cover exactly 200 meters. This meant the entire 2-kilometer corridor required precisely 10 sequential 4-second windows of invisibility for the drones to complete their transit without sustained detection. The pressure on the FP-1 guidance system was immense. A deviation of even a few meters or a fractional slowdown in speed could mean emerging from the cover ground clutter directly into the sweeping, powerful beam of the Podlet K-1. The predictability of the spinning searchlights was the FP-1's greatest tactical advantage, but it was a fleeting advantage that demanded absolute precision. The Russian engineers had designed the system for maximum coverage, assuming that redundancy would defeat stealth. They had underestimated the enemy's patience and dedication to mapping the mechanical heartbeat of their defenses, allowing the FP-1S to turn continuous rotation into a deadly rhythmic weakness. The entire success of the attack was now dependent on whether this perfect temporal vulnerability would remain open long enough for all three drones to thread the needle of the spinning searchlights. The reliance on predictable rotation of the Podlet K-1 radars was a high-risk gamble, one that was immediately threatened by an active Russian countermeasure: the shrinking corridor. Russian intelligence, recognizing the vulnerability inherent in predictable rotational patterns, had begun implementing random desynchronization of the radar stations. This adaptive tactic was designed to eliminate the fixed, predictable blind spots that the Ukrainians had so meticulously mapped, forcing the FP-1 drones to race against a rapidly closing, dynamically shifting window of opportunity. The desynchronization meant that the once reliable 4-second gap was no longer a certainty. The corridor was shrinking and the timing of the windows was becoming randomized and unpredictable. The Russian operators were actively disrupting the mechanical rhythm of their own defense, creating an environment of maximum uncertainty for the incoming threats. This immediate counter-adaptation placed immense pressure on the FP-1S. The lead drone, relying on the pre-programmed timing based on old intelligence, entered the corridor at 0447. It was a high-stakes gamble. For seconds invisible as the beam swept away, followed by 2 seconds visible as a single radar swept past, before becoming invisible again. The brief contact, something small, moving fast, was seen by the radar operator, but the contact was too brief, too ambiguous to trigger an immediate, high-priority alarm. The second drone followed 30 seconds behind, still on course and successfully navigating the randomized window, maintaining its invisibility. However, the third drone was now facing a rapidly escalating crisis. The randomized rotation patterns had been fully implemented, and the safe, dark corner was collapsing. The lead drone's brief contact was a sign that the safe passage was no longer guaranteed. The element of risk was magnified by a simultaneous internal failure. A microscopic flaw in the third drone's autopilot gyroscope had caused it to drift 200 meters off course. The drone, now dangerously outside the narrow 2-kilometer corridor, received the new orders for randomized rotation patterns. The drone corrected hard north, burning precious fuel in the high G-turn, a necessary but costly maneuver. It entered the collapsing corridor at 0449. The random synchronization was complete, and the drone's maneuver placed it directly into the path of the sweeping beams. Both radars painted it clearly. The operator, receiving a clear contact bearing 270, speed 180, altitude 50 meters, now had unambiguous data. The corridor was gone, and the third drone was exposed, forcing a split-second decision that would determine the entire mission's success. The race was now on, not just against distance, but against the dynamic adaptation of the enemy's radar technology. The lead FP-1 drone's penetration of the dynamic radar field was a triumph of timing and intelligence, successfully exploiting the fleeting gaps created by the spinning searchlights. The drone entered the narrow, precarious corridor at 0447, relying on the crucial, pre-calculated physics of the radar sweep to achieve momentary cloaking. Its success was defined by the 4 seconds invisible window, the brief period every minute when the beams of the two Podlet K-1 radar stations were momentarily pointed away from its position. The drone's trajectory was a razor-thin calculation of speed versus rotation. At 180 kilometers per hour, the drone was covering exactly 50 meters per second. The 4 seconds of invisibility provided exactly 200 meters of unopposed travel. The FP-1 had entered the gap, covered the distance, and then emerged into brief coverage of a single radar beam before quickly entering the next period of darkness. The radar operator, observing the sweep, would have seen a brief, fleeting contact as one of the beams swept across the low-flying, non-metallic target. The signal would be weak, inconsistent, and immediately lost as the beam continued its rotation. The contact was ambiguous. Something small, moving fast, but not persistent enough to trigger the high-priority alert reserved for sustained, solid radar tracks. This momentary exposure was an acceptable risk, as the drone's low-altitude profile immediately relegated the weak signal to the realm of probable clutter or small aircraft. The lead drone's successful penetration confirmed the foundational intelligence of the operation, the existence and exploitability of the radar gap. It proved that the velocity and low signature profile of the FP-1 were sufficient to defeat the Podlet K-1's tracking algorithms during the brief moment of its visibility. The lead drone's flawless execution set the pace for the subsequent assets, confirming that the initial high-risk course adjustment and timing were accurate. Its passage was silent, successful, and immediately placed in the final approach zone. The drone continued its mission, now focused on the final, physical defenses of the spy ship. The first thread had been successfully pulled to the eye of the needle, but the subsequent drones faced an even greater challenge as the corridor continued to shrink and the timing became increasingly random, placing immense pressure on the second and third drones to replicate this precision under escalating conditions of uncertainty. The final passage to the collapsing radar corridor became a costly compromise for the third FP-1 drone, turning its entry from a silent penetration into a high-priority detection. The issue began with the microscopic flaw in its autopilot gyroscope, which caused the drone to drift 200 meters off course, a deviation that was catastrophic in the context of the narrowing 2-kilometer window. The drone was no longer flying on a precise, pre-calculated vector. It was exposed. The implementation of the random desynchronization further compounded the crisis. The corridor, once a reliable dark corner, was now a dangerous gauntlet. The third drone, detecting the off-course deviation, was forced to execute a hard correction north, a rapid, high-G maneuver that immediately burned 12 minutes of precious fuel. This compromise was made to save the mission, but it came at a significant cost. The drone would now reach the target area with less than 60 seconds of operational fuel remaining, dramatically limiting its margin for error in the final seconds of the attack. At 0449, the third drone entered the corridor. The rapid correction placed it directly into the path of the dynamically sweeping beams. Both radars painted it clearly. This was no longer an intermittent blip. The drone was registered as a confirmed high-speed, low-altitude contact. The radar operator received the unambiguous data. Contact bearing 270, speed 180, altitude 50 meters. The operator, already overwhelmed by the massive, simultaneous decoy attack on Sevastopol, now faced a critical decision: a single, questionable blip versus 20 confirmed targets at Sevastopol. The doctrine trap, engineered by the decoy swarm, saved the drone. The operator, prioritizing the major, visible threat, marked the third drone as probable bird, a low-priority, ambiguous contact, and returned to tracking the 20 decoys. The third drone had made it through, but the exposure and the necessary evasive maneuver had cost it the critical fuel necessary for a sustained attack. The final compromise meant that the drone was now a true high-stakes asset, with a negligible reserve of power, forced to rely on pure luck and the continued success of the decoy deception to survive its final minutes of transit. Its passage, though detected, was ultimately dismissed, proving that overwhelming a command system with a false threat is often more effective than attempting to achieve absolute stealth. As the FP-1 Vanguard successfully breached the fixed coastal radar defenses, the final line of physical defense around the spy ship came into focus: the patrol screen. This screen was a critical security measure implemented since the loss of the Moskva, designed to prevent close-in surprise attacks and provide an immediate physical response capability. The screen consisted of two Project 03160 patrol boats, fast, well-armed craft that maintained a protective circle at a 5-kilometer radius around the high-value intelligence vessel. This formation was intended to act as a moving radar fence. The patrol boats circled constantly, maintaining a state of high readiness. Their own radar and visual surveillance capabilities were essential, but their true effectiveness was rooted in their dependency on the spy ship itself. The intelligence vessel, with its much more powerful mineral ME radar and advanced electronic intelligence (ELINT) systems, could detect threats that the smaller patrol boats could not. The ship acted as a quarterback, vectoring the two patrol boats to investigate contacts and interdict threats. The Russian doctrine was clear. The spy ship was the brain, and the patrol boats were the hands, working in tandem to establish a multi-layered defense. However, this defense was already critically compromised. The air cover was gone, and the sheer focus of command system was fixed on the decoy swarm. The patrol screen was operating in a state of high alert but low situational awareness regarding the true, low-altitude threat approaching from the east. Furthermore, the patrol boats were briefed for aluminum drones with clear infrared signatures, meaning their crews were psychologically and technologically prepared for a threat entirely different from the plywood ghosts skimming the waves. The physical screen was in place, enforcing the standard doctrine of circling at a 5-kilometer radius, but its effectiveness was dependent on two factors that were rapidly diminishing: the spy ship's ability to maintain clear radar lock on the low-signature threats, and the crew's ability to spot the non-metallic threats visually against the morning haze. The patrol screen was the FP-1's final physical obstacle, a necessary challenge that had to be overcome through either evasion or a direct, sacrificial engagement. The fate of the spy ship now rested on the vigilance of the two boats and the clarity of the intelligence being fed to them by the high-value target they were sworn to protect. The grand deception culminated in the decoy fleet's final act, the moment when the 20 modified jet skis and commercial boats completed their mission of distraction and confusion. At 0500 hours, as the Russian Ka-27PL helicopters closed the engagement range after their long, high-speed transit west, the 20 decoys suddenly scattered in different directions. This chaotic dispersal was a final layer of the deception, designed to maximize the confusion, expenditure of fuel, and operational time of the Russian air defense. None of the decoys attempted to reach an actual military target. Their job, luring the air cover away from Novorossiysk, was already done. The decoys performed their final, sacrificial maneuvers. Some beached themselves on empty coastline, making for easy but ultimately worthless targets. Others circled in place until their fuel ran out, creating lingering, ambiguous radar contacts. A few simply stopped moving, becoming static electronic clutter. The final act was a deliberate choice to force a prolonged, futile engagement. The helicopters, having committed themselves fully, were now forced to waste precious time, fuel, and ammunition hunting stragglers. The commanders were obligated to confirm the destruction of every single one of the 20 confirmed targets, ensuring none reached Sevastopol. This search mission consumed another hour of critical time. The helicopters expended fuel and wasted ammunition on drones that cost less than a single depth charge. The economic efficiency of the decoy mission was confirmed in this final hunt. Cheap assets forced the expenditure of expensive ordnance and, more importantly, invaluable operational time. By the time the Ka-27PL crews realized the full extent of deception, They were 180 kilometers from Novorossiysk, and half their fuel was gone. The final act of scattering guaranteed that the helicopters would not only be out of position for the required 2 hours, but would be forced into a high-risk return trip with limited endurance, making their immediate redeployment to protect the spy ship impossible. The decoy fleet sacrifice secured the unopposed final approach of the FP-1 Vanguard, confirming that the most effective strategy in asymmetric warfare is to create an illusion so compelling that the enemy commits their most valuable resources to fighting a non-existent war. As the morning fog thickened, the lead FP-1 drone, now 240 kilometers from the target, entered the next critical phase of electronic warfare, facing the Russian Navy's most sophisticated countermeasure, the return to blindness. The Russian spy ship, desperate to regain control over the electronic battlespace and protect itself, had activated its 330 ZHTO system from Crimea. This was not simple. Crude jamming designed to overload the drone systems. It was a sophisticated electronic warfare tactic known as spoofing, the broadcasting of whispered lies, fake GPS signals, to rewrite the drone's perceived reality. The R330 ZHTO system, broadcasting its fake signals at a powerful 100 watts, completely overwhelmed the faint, legitimate signals from real GPS satellites, which arrive at less than $0.00001 watts. The Russians had perfected this trick, using it to walk drones toward the ground by manipulating the reported altitude. Now, they were attempting to walk the lead FP-1 toward a Panzer battery, a land-based air defense system, ensuring its destruction by conventional means. The drone's GPS position began to slide east, indicating its internal system was accepting the fake coordinates. This deliberate manipulation was intended to destroy the drone by making it believe it was far off course and leading it into a prepared defensive kill zone. However, the Ukrainians had learned from previous engagements. Every 50 kilometers, oil platforms dotted the Black Sea, fixed, unmoving structures whose coordinates were preloaded into the FP-1's primitive guidance systems. The FP-1's primitive electro-optical camera, the old reliable Mark I Mod 1 eyeball, could spot these platforms from 5 kilometers away. Upon visual confirmation, the drone system would reset its position based on the fixed, verified coordinates of the platform. No amount of spoofing could overcome this simple visual verification. The FP-1 was programmed to trust the visual reality over the electronic lie. The spy ship's sophisticated spoofing system was defeated by the drone's low-tech visual check, confirming the resilience of basic human perception over complex electronic manipulation. The lead FP-1 regained its correct vector, but the electronic battle continued, placing immense stress on the drone's less robust internal components, a stress that would soon claim its first victim. The electronic warfare battle initiated by the Russian spoofing system, though initially defeated by the lead drone's visual verification, proved too much for the second FP-1, leading to the loss of the second drone and a critical setback for the mission. The drone did not fall victim to jamming or sophisticated fake GPS signals. Its failure was rooted in a mundane, yet catastrophic, hardware failure. A junky Chinese capacitor could not withstand the repeated temperature cycling and electronic stress of the mission. At 0615 hours, the second drone's GPS receiver died. The failure was not from external jamming, but from the physical collapse of a critical, cheap electronic component. The loss of the GPS signal, the drone's primary navigational reference, forced it to switch immediately to its secondary system, inertial navigation INS. While reliable over short distances, INS over water is inherently unstable and prone to accumulating error. The physics of inertial navigation over the smooth, featureless surface of the Black Sea meant that the drone was accumulating 10 meters of error per minute over the course of its flight since the failure. This small, compounding error became catastrophic. The drone was steadily drifting 8 kilometers off course, heading for the empty ocean instead of the target area. The drone, now blind and fundamentally adrift, continued to fly under the illusion of a correct course, its system unable to reconcile the massive accumulated error. At 0645 hours, the second drone hit the water, There was no explosion, just a gentle, silent splash, confirming the hardware failure. The loss was profound, reducing the FP-1 Vanguard from 3 to 2 and eliminating a critical delivery asset. The remaining 2 drones, the lead and the third, now carried the full weight of the mission. The loss of the second drone served as a chilling reminder that the success of even the most sophisticated strategic plan can be undone by the failure of a single, cheap component, confirming the inherent fragility of long-distance, high-stress electronic missions. As the 2 remaining FP-1 drones closed on a target area, the Russian spy ship went active, activating its primary surveillance system, the powerful Mineral Me radar, and escalating the electronic warfare battle to its most critical phase. The activation of the Mineral Me was the ship's last, best hope for defeating the incoming threat, relying on the radar's known parameters, a search designed primarily for aluminum returns. At 0723 hours, the ship's signals intelligence team, utilizing the R-381T arrays, finally achieved a breakthrough. Every electronic device, even the FP-1's basic guidance system, creates faint harmonics or ghost frequencies when circuits resonate. The intelligence team found a clear electronic signature on a bearing of 285, indicating a high-speed contact at 180 kilometers per hour, 15 kilometers out. The ship's powerful Mineral Me radar immediately locked onto the lead drone. The lead drone's primitive threat receiver registered the sharp, powerful radar lock, indicating it was actively being tracked by the main ship's surveillance system. However, the FP-1's core advantage, which confuses radar design for metal, immediately came into play. The Mineral ME's advanced tracking algorithms were designed to look for sharp, high-intensity returns from aluminum. The plywood construction gave the radar a mushy, inconsistent return, a signal that was difficult to sustain and classify. The radar kept losing lock as the drone skimmed the waves and the signal faded into the ground clutter. The operator, receiving the frustrating intermittent data, reported the contact as possibly birds, an echo of the earlier failure, but now emanating from the high-value target itself. The third FP-1, now just behind the lead drone, was programmed for this precise scenario. Detecting the sustained radar lock, it made a critical tactical decision. It shut down everything except its mechanical gyroscope. The drone went flying blind on compass heading alone, silencing its electronic emissions and eliminating the harmonic signature that the intelligence team was exploiting. This act of self-imposed electronic silence meant the third drone was now entirely invisible to the spy ship's element, though dangerously reliant on a perfect magnetic heading. The Mineral ME's search for aluminum was proving futile against the low-tech material science of the FP-1, forcing the spy ship into a state of frustrated, intermittent electronic blindness. The intense electronic warfare launched by the Russian spy ship, designed to protect it from the incoming threat, inadvertently created a massive self-inflicted wound known in military doctrine as electromagnetic fratricide. The ship's desperate attempt to shield itself against the low-flying threats was actively degrading its own ability to track them, confirming a calculated risk in the ship's operational manual that was about to incur its true cost. The problem lay with the ship's robust defensive system. There are 984 jammers. These jammers were designed to protect the ship against naval drones by creating a massive field of electromagnetic noise across multiple frequency bands. However, the jammers operated in the 20 to 1,000 megahertz range, a spectrum that fell directly in the middle of the ship's own communication and radar frequencies. Every time the jammers transmitted their powerful denial signals, they were simultaneously creating electromagnetic noise that degraded their own radar returns and communication clarity. The Mineral Me radar, already struggling to maintain a lock on the mushy, plywood returns, was further hindered by the jammer's interference. The low-intensity, inconsistent signals from the FP-1S were being actively drowned out by the ship's own self-generated electronic noise. The crew was forced to choose between jamming potential communication links and maintaining clear radar tracks, a trade-off the manual called a calculated risk. This act of electromagnetic fratricide provided the final, critical cover for the two remaining FP-1 drones. The lead drone's intermittent contact was dismissed more easily because the background noise was artificially elevated by the ship's own defense systems. The decision to prioritize powerful jamming over clear radar imagery was a fatal error, confirming that the spy ship, in its state of high alert and isolation, was actively working against its own detection capabilities. At 0725 hours, the ship, unable to maintain a reliable lock, vetoed a patrol boat to investigate the intermittent contact. The boat accelerated to 35 knots, its crew manning the forward PK machine gun. They were operating under the false premise of the mineral ME's degraded intelligence, forced to search a wide area based on fleeting, inaccurate bearing. The spy ship's advanced, self-interfering electronic systems had succeeded only in delaying the inevitable, confirming that even the most advanced defense systems can be neutralized by internal conflict and doctrinal oversight. With the spy ship unable to maintain a reliable electronic lock due to the self-inflicted wound of electromagnetic fratricide, the defense was forced to revert to physical interdiction. At 0725 hours, the ship exercised its last remaining tactical option. It vetoed a patrol boat to investigate the intermittent contacts. The Project 03160 patrol boat, a fast, maneuverable vessel designed for close-in defense, accelerated immediately to its maximum speed of 35 knots, heading out on the vague bearing provided by the spy ship's compromised mineral me radar. The crew of the patrol boat, galvanized by the general alarm from the massive, distant decoy attack in the Pacific, localized alert from their mothership, moved with disciplined urgency. The crew manned the forward PK machine gun, the primary close-in defense against fast surface threats. The gunner loaded a fresh 200-round belt, checked the iron sights, and braced against the mount, ready for the high-speed engagement. His loader stood ready with 2 more belts, confirming the vessel's readiness to engage a persistent threat. Their drill was rooted in standard naval doctrine. Engage low-flying targets at 500 meters, walk tracers into the target, and maintain fire until splash. They had practiced this hundreds of times, preparing for the known, predictable enemy, the aluminum-hulled, heat-emitting drone. Their briefing, however, was fundamentally flawed. The crew was prepared for the clear, infrared signatures of armed, metallic drones. Nobody mentioned plywood ghosts. The patrol boat's own radar, less powerful than the spy ship's, was also struggling with the low-altitude ground clutter and the dense morning fog, which was now thick enough to reduce visibility to a critical 500 meters. The patrol boat was executing a blind search, relying on the hope of visual acquisition rather than clear electronic intelligence. This reliance on visual confirmation was precisely what the FP-1's design exploited. The crew was hunting a phantom, a low-tech asset that existed beneath the thermal and radar thresholds they were trained to detect. The patrol boat sped toward the general area of the intermittent contact, its crew scanning the water with intense, anxious vigilance, their focus entirely consumed by the immediate physical threat. Every minute they spent searching on the vague bearing was another minute the lead FP-1 was closing the distance, utilizing the fog and continuing electronic infusion as its final, invaluable cloak. The hunter was operating with deliberately compromised intelligence, while the prey was executing a flawless, low-altitude run straight into the defensive perimeter, setting up the inevitable, high-stakes close-quarters engagement. The fate of the mission was now reduced to a simple race between the patrol boat's visual acuity and the FP-1's remaining fuel. The final, decisive element that guaranteed the FP-1 Vanguard's ability to penetrate the spy ship's immediate defense was not an electronic countermeasure or a tactical maneuver, but a meteorological phenomenon, the final veil of severe temperature inversion. This natural occurrence, common in the Black Sea during the early morning hours of late summer and early autumn, created a physics anomaly that rendered the spy ship's sophisticated radar system completely blind to the low-flying threats. The temperature inversion occurred when warm air settled over cold water. The Black Sea water, still holding the warmth of the summer, rapidly cooled the morning air directly above the surface. This temperature differential, approximately 10 degrees Celsius in just 50 meters of altitude, created a severe atmospheric lens. The varying density of the air acted like a prism, bending the radio waves, the radar beams, upward. Radar operators are trained to correct for this phenomenon, but the correction formulas assume standard conditions. This morning's inversion was extreme, bending the radar beams upward at a dramatic 15-degree angle. The spy ship's mineral me radar, which the crew believed was scanning the critical altitude of 50 meters above the water, was actually sending its beam significantly higher, focusing its surveillance on an altitude of 80 meters in reality. This was a critical failure. The physical reality dictated that anything below 30 meters was completely invisible to the ship's main radar. The lead FP-1 drone, skimming at a mere 3 meters above the water, might as well have been a submarine. The temperature inversion provided the ultimate, invisible cloak, ensuring that the ship's most powerful detection system was literally looking over the threat. The Russian operators, seeing their screens clear at the 50-meter altitude, were falsely reassured that the immediate approaches were clear, unaware that the physical environment itself had defeated their technology. This meteorological coincidence was a final, devastating piece of the deception puzzle, proving that sometimes the most effective tool in asymmetric warfare is the unpredictable hand of nature. The FP-1, the Plywood Ghost, slipped underneath the radar beam, completing its transit to the final electronic barrier and entering the visual engagement zone with the patrol boat, its presence undetected until it was too late to react with overwhelming force. The physical environment had successfully created the conditions for a close-in surprise attack, setting the stage for the lead drone's sacrificial run. The lead FP-1 drone, successfully cloaked by the temperature inversion and the thick morning fog, reached a critical engagement range at 0732 hours. The spy ship was perfectly positioned, sitting exactly where predicted, still vectoring the patrol boat based on intermittent, inaccurate intelligence. The drone, now running on the edge of its remaining fuel, had to complete its final, sacrificial run. The patrol boat, searching blindly in the fog, spotted the FP-1 visually at a distance of 500 meters. The sudden appearance of the low-flying target out of the dense morning haze triggered an immediate, instinctual reaction from the crew. On the lead drone's primitive camera, the patrol boat grew rapidly larger, its masts and the figures of the crew becoming clear. The sound of the muzzle flash was the first indication of the engagement. The PKM's distinctive chatter echoed across the water as the gunner opened fire, spraying a continuous stream of tracers walking across the surface. The gunner, trained to engage at this distance, maintained a rapid, sustained fire designed to shred the assumed aluminum hull. The FP-1's speed and low profile minimized the damage, but the barrage was intense. 3 rounds hit the Plywood drone, punching clean holes through the wood but failing to achieve a catastrophic kill. 1 round, however, clipped the propeller. The damage was critical. The engine began vibrating violently against its mount, but the relentless, tiny gasoline engine miraculously kept running. The drone, damaged but functioning, cleared the patrol boat's immediate engagement range, pushing forward with crippled engine. Its survival was temporary. The damage was fatal. The drone had only 90 seconds of fuel remaining, its engine mount compromised. Yet, it had achieved its primary objective. It had confirmed its presence and attracted all attention. The patrol boat radioed the spy ship, drone inbound, bearing 285, damaged but still flying. The bridge crew of the spy ship immediately grabbed binoculars, their focus locked onto the south, the sector where the patrol boat was pointing. They were tracking the crippled, sacrificial asset, completely oblivious of the real threat. The lead drone, mortally wounded but still airborne, had done its job. It had created the crucial visual and auditory distraction, confirming the enemy's focus in the wrong sector. Its final, dying seconds were dedicated to luring every Russian eye away from the true, unseen threat approaching from the north, guaranteeing the third drone's successful, unobserved entry. The intentional sacrifice of the lead FP-1 drone executed the crucial tactical maneuver of the misdirection, ensuring that at the absolute critical moment, every Russian eye was tracking the wrong target. The lead drone's damaged engine finally seized at 0734 hours, moments after clearing the patrol boat, initiating its final, inevitable glide into the water. This visible, chaotic spectacle was a perfect decoy. The patrol boat crew, having engaged the threat, continued to track the damaged vessel as it plunged toward the surface. The bridge crew of the spy ship, having received the urgent radio call, were already focused on the south. The dramatic sight of the drone's final erratic glide, followed by the splash into the water, confirmed their belief that the immediate threat was contained and now being neutralized. The crew's focus was absolute, fixated on the area where the visible engagement had just occurred. They were looking south, exactly where the patrol boat was pointing. Crucially, they should have been looking northwest. While the entire Russian defense was tracking the crippled, dying drone, the real threat approached unseen. The third FP-1 drone, which had been forced to fly blind on its mechanical gyroscope alone after shutting down its electronic systems, had maintained its course. It had successfully navigated the final stretch of water, emerging from the dense morning haze at 0734 hours, the precise moment the lead drone's engine seized. Approaching from the spy ship's port bow at 180 kilometers per hour, it was flying at 10 meters above the water, too low for the ship's navigation radar. The ship's designers, like most in the Soviet era, had never conceived of a threat that would attack from a low, close-in angle that forced the navigation radar to depress below -5 degrees. The final misdirection was complete. The patrol boats were out of position, pursuing the visual aftermath of the first engagement. The bridge crew was actively scanning the wrong sector, their binoculars trained south. The third drone had achieved perfect visual and electronic surprise, a consequence of the lead drone's sacrifice and the crew's adherence to the immediate, visible crisis. The stage was set for the final catastrophic impact, achieved through a perfectly orchestrated sequence of deception and sacrifice. The entire complex operation, the decoy swarm, the evasion, the spoofing battle, had culminated in this single moment of supreme misdirection, delivering the final asset to the point of impact entirely unobserved by the high-value target. The critical moment that secured the mission's success lay entirely in the angle of attack, a meticulously planned vector that exploited a catastrophic, yet entirely predictable, design flaw in the Russian spy ship's architecture. The third FP-1 drone, flying blind but true on its mechanical gyroscope after silencing its own electronic emissions, was approaching from the port bow at a blistering 180 kilometers per hour. Its altitude was set at a mere 10 meters above the water, a tactical profile chosen specifically to defeat the vessel's organic defenses. The engineers who designed the ship, adhering to Soviet-era naval doctrine, had never conceived a threat that would materialize so close to the surface and from such an unexpected vector. Their primary defense systems, including the powerful but physically constrained navigation radar, were built with a structural limitation. The antenna could not physically depress below -5 degrees. This meant that anything fast-moving and low-flying that closed a distance below 10 meters was guaranteed to be in an absolute radar shadow, rendering the ship incapable of detecting the third drone with its own internal sensors. This was the final devastating consequence of technological rigidity. The massive intelligence vessel was defeated by an architectural oversight. The physical screen that was supposed to protect the ship had already collapsed. The two patrol boats that constituted the close-in defense were hopelessly out of position, drawn away from the true threat by the misdirection engineered by the sacrificial lead drone, which had plunged into the water in the southern sector. The bridge crew, receiving the frantic radio reports, remained fixated on the wrong area, their attention entirely consumed by the visible aftermath of the prior engagement. The ship's internal protocols, designed for threats intercepted at a distance, were rendered entirely useless in this extreme close-quarters scenario. The attack was now entirely a matter of timing and human reaction speed, a race between the drone's velocity and the ability of a single human to spot the incoming danger against the thick morning haze. The Russian lookouts, representing the final, non-electronic defense layer, were the ship's last hope. These lookouts, disciplined in scanning the perimeter, were the only systems capable of detecting a target that had successfully evaded every electronic eye. The final, critical seconds unfolded rapidly. One Russian lookout, perhaps scanning the quadrant out of ingrained habit or instinct, finally spotted the third drone at a distance of approximately 300 meters. The immediate alarm would have been sounded, but at the drone's closing speed of 180 kilometers per hour, 300 meters translated to a devastatingly short 6 seconds of flight time, an insurmountable obstacle for any last-minute defensive action, such as deploying small arms or attempting an emergency evasive maneuver. The drone's fixed camera, maintaining its course dictated by the mechanical gyroscope, was perfectly centered on the bridge roof, the single, most critical point on the vessel. This was a location where the main mast housed all three special antennas. The sensitive R381T electronic intelligence arrays, the powerful mineral-me radar antenna, and the vital communication systems. The angle of attack had been executed with surgical precision, delivering the warhead to the exact node of the ship's electronic nervous system. The drone was no longer merely a projectile. It was a mechanism for a strategic, non-lethal, yet mission-ending decapitation of the intelligence vessel. The success of the attack was entirely secured by its ability to turn the ship's own design assumptions against it, utilizing the simple physics of altitude and the mechanical limitations of the high-tech radar to achieve perfect, fatal surprise. The complex operation, which began with deception and evasion, was culminating in a final, simple, physical act that would erase weeks of intelligence gathering in a single, devastating impact. The high-value target was completely exposed, its own technology proving to be its greatest vulnerability in the face of the low-tech, high-speed Phantom. The lookout's alarm was instantly overwhelmed by the catastrophic reality of the strike, initiating the decapitation strike that instantly crippled the intelligence vessel. At approximately 0735 hours, the third FP-1 drone, carrying its specialized 25-kilogram warhead, smashed with violent finality directly into the base of the main mast on the bridge roof. The attack's intent was not to sink the massive hull, a near impossible feat for such a small warhead, but to gut the bridge instantly and neutralize the ship's intelligence-gathering capability. The force of the explosion was strategically localized and devastatingly effective. The warhead's blast immediately obliterated the complex cluster of critical electronic systems clustered at the mast base. The sensitive, finely tuned R381T arrays, the sophisticated electronic ears that had patiently logged 6 weeks of vital drone launch patterns, were instantly melted and rendered inert by the intense heat and concussive force of the blast. The ship's intelligence core, the servers and computers containing the 6 weeks of patterns, and the near-complete predictive model that was days away from neutering Ukraine's drone campaign, were immediately slagged and fused into useless electronic debris. The powerful, dedicated mineral-me radar antenna, crucial for surface surveillance, was ripped violently from its mounts and twisted into a mangled, unrecognizable sculpture of distorted metal. The physical integrity of the mast was fatally compromised, severing all communication and electronic surveillance lines running into the superstructure. The immediate effect across the vessel was one of overwhelming system shock. The bridge area was physically incapacitated, and the ship's entire electronic brain, its ability to listen, track, and command its defensive assets, was instantly neutralized and silenced. The primary explosion was followed by cascading secondary explosions as the ensuing fires tore through the high-voltage power supplies and the dense cabling feeding the specialized electronic suites. The ship, though not fatally breached below the waterline, was functionally blind, deaf, and mute. This confirmed the strategic success of the mission. The objective was the destruction of the intelligence, not merely the destruction of the hull. The decapitation strike achieved this with surgical finality. When the intense fires were finally brought under control and extinguished, a labor that took a harrowing 18 hours, the damage to the ship's vital electronic suites was revealed to be absolute. Damage assessment teams later described the ruined electronic radar suite as resembling a Salvador Dali painting, a chaotic, surrealist landscape of melted plastic, fused circuits, and ruined metal. The ship would ultimately sail again, a massive, floating platform, but its electronic eyes and ears were permanently blind and would require a complex multi-million-dollar, months-long refit. The 6 weeks of painstaking, high-value intelligence gathering, the patterns that held the key to neutralizing Ukraine's naval campaign, were entirely gone, incinerated by the single low-cost, high-speed drone. This strike confirmed that the true power center of the modern warship is its sensitive electronic intelligence, and that crippling this capability is often strategically more valuable than a conventional sinking. The resulting devastation marked the final tally of the mission's strategic success. The total obliteration of 6 weeks of irreplaceable intelligence gathering and the decisive elimination of the predictive model that had threatened to end Ukraine's naval drone war. The physical damage to the ship was immense, but the strategic damage inflicted upon the entire Russian Black Sea Fleet's counter-drone capability was far greater, proving to be incalculable and strategically irreversible. The primary goal of the attack was not merely achieved, it was exceeded. The simple phrase "the patterns are gone" summarized a profound victory. The spy ship's memory banks that contained dozens of recorded drone launches, precise timing windows, established operational routes, and the intricate electronic fingerprints of the entire Ukrainian drone fleet. All of this irreplaceable data, the culmination of massive intelligence effort, was instantly turned into useless slag and ash in the devastating fire that swept through the bridge superstructure. The destruction of the sensitive R-381T arrays guaranteed that even if the ship could limp back to its home port, its capacity to resume its critical intelligence gathering mission was neutralized for a period of many months, pending a major and complex refit of its specialized equipment. This created an immediate and devastating operational vacuum for the Russian forces. The high-value knowledge, the ability to predict strikes and implement preemptive countermeasures, had been entirely erased. The FP-1 mission had not merely disrupted a single patrol, it had effectively reset the entire counter-drone conflict back to its starting point, forcing the Russian side to recommence their arduous, time-consuming intelligence cycle from scratch. The strategic cost of this loss was staggering. The spy ship was a unique, highly specialized intelligence asset whose data was a product of immense investment in time, technology, and resource deployment. Its successful destruction effectively guaranteed the continued viability of the Ukrainian naval drone program. The strategic window that had been closing rapidly was now violently forced open again. The consequences of this immediate operational change became apparent within a matter of hours following the strike. Taking advantage of the enemy's sudden, profound blindness, Ukrainian drones were immediately launching from new sites with new patterns, now operating under a renewed veil of invisibility and unpredictability. The Russian command could still strike based on old, outdated intelligence gathered before the attack, but now they were largely hitting empty fields, wasting precious resources on obsolete data. The critical predictive patterns were gone. The success of the mission confirmed the overwhelming strategic power of a perfectly executed asymmetrical strike. By prioritizing the destruction of intelligence, the enemy's knowledge, over the destruction of the physical hull, the Ukrainians had achieved a victory whose ramifications would reshape the entire Black Sea campaign. The spy ship, a massive and expensive piece of military hardware, had been rendered strategically irrelevant by the single, cheap Plywood drone, confirming that in modern warfare, the true centers of gravity are the electronic eyes and ears, not the armor plating or the physical structure of the vessel. The successful decapitation of the Russian spy ship by the FP-1 Vanguard serves as a definitive conclusion to this extraordinary operation, offering profound and actionable lessons on the cost of complacency and the ultimate power of low-tech, high-ingenuity warfare. The mission stands as a surgical indictment of the inherent vulnerabilities that emerge when an advanced military force becomes overly reliant on predictable, formalized doctrine and overconfident in the infallibility of its sophisticated technology. The primary lesson is stark. The spy ship's failure was not an accident of fate or bad luck, but the direct, cumulative result of a series of calculated risks and systematic complacency throughout the chain of command. The Russians were ultimately defeated by a force comprised of augmented jet skis and 3 plywood ghosts. Their complex, expensive systems, including the powerful mineral me radar, the sensitive R381T arrays, and the entire Ka-27PL air wing, were all successfully countered by simple, often overlooked elements of the environment and material science. The low cost of plywood, the natural occurrence of the temperature inversion, and the predictable adherence to established military doctrine. This trifecta of simplicity proved insurmountable. The chain of failure was clear. The ship's failure to adapt its algorithms to the low-signature plywood targets, the fatal error of the forepost operator who logged the threat as probable birds, and the admiral's rigid doctrinal commitment of the entire air cover to the decoy swarm all cascaded into final, crippling impact. The strategic consequence is the undeniable return to blindness for the Russian Black Sea Fleet. The complete obliteration of the 6 weeks of intelligence gathering has created a strategic vacuum that cannot be quickly or easily filled. The drone war, which was moments away from being neutralized by the predictive model, has been granted a crucial new lease of life. The Ukrainians have successfully bought themselves precious time and operational freedom, forcing the Russians to once again hunt for elusive, silent ghosts in the dark. This shift effectively returns a tactical advantage to the side with the most innovative, rapidly adapting, and asymmetrical technology. The entire operation is a masterclass in the principles of asymmetrical warfare, a high-leverage strike executed by low-cost assets that achieved a strategic objective whose value far outweighed complexity and cost of the mission itself. The fate of the Black Sea campaign continues to be defined by the quiet innovation of the unseen and the catastrophic consequences of technological overconfidence. The Plywood Phantom had secured the continued ability to fight at sea, demonstrating that ingenuity is the greatest force multiplier of all. The successful neutralization of the Russian spy ship by a handful of plywood drones secures a profound legacy of low-tech innovation, confirming a fundamental truth of modern warfare. The greatest strategic breakthroughs often stem not from developing the next multi-billion-dollar platform, but from weaponizing simple ingenuity and exploiting the cheapest available materials. The FP-1 strike stands as a definitive demonstration of the core principle of modern asymmetric conflict, the critical vulnerability of high-cost, high-tech systems to simple, non-metallic countermeasures. The choice to use plywood and low-cost commercial boats was a strategic masterstroke of the entire operation, effectively turning a physical weakness, the lack of armor and defensive systems, into an insurmountable electronic strength, near-perfect invisibility, to standard radar and thermal sensors. This innovation challenges the very core of established global military procurement and defense budgeting, proving that a decisive strategic advantage can be acquired for a minuscule fraction of the cost of the system designed to defend against it. The legacy also underscores the immense value of signals intelligence and patient observation. The FP-1 team did not defeat the Russian systems by overwhelming them with sheer numbers or technological superiority, but by meticulously mapping the mechanical rhythm of the Podlet K-1 radar sweeps and exploiting predictable, rigid deployment protocols of the Ka-27PL helicopter fleet. The success was rooted in 6 weeks of patient, dedicated analysis of the enemy's operational patterns, rather than 6 weeks of building superior hardware. The entire mission was a triumph for the analyst and the engineer working in perfect, adaptive synergy. The economic symmetry of the attack is a central component of its lasting legacy. The minimal expenditure on 20 cheap decoy boats and 3 plywood attack drones, an investment less than the cost of a single high-speed helicopter intercept, resulted in the total neutralization of a multi-million-dollar intelligence vessel and the destruction of 6 weeks of irreplaceable, high-value data. The ratio cost to strategic effect is profoundly skewed in favor of the attacker, a reality that will necessitate the complete rewriting of naval defense doctrine for years to come. The legacy of this mission is the enduring lesson that genuine innovation flourishes most effectively under duress, and that a determined, resourceful adversary will inevitably find a way to turn the enemy's perceived strength into their most catastrophic weakness. The Plywood Phantom is not merely a war story. It is a comprehensive blueprint for the future of warfare, demonstrating unequivocally that the simplest material can carry the most devastating and strategically valuable punch. The Black Sea has become the proving ground for this new reality, confirming that the age of low-tech ingenuity has not just arrived, but has fundamentally altered the balance of power at sea. The strategic destruction of the Russian spy ship by a small number of Plywood drones is far more than just a successful military operation. It is a clear and urgent call to action, CTA, demanding a fundamental global reevaluation of military planning, defense spending priorities, and threat assessment methodologies. The lessons learned from the Black Sea are defining the future of conflict, and they require immediate, critical attention from strategists, engineers, and policymakers around the world. The primary CTA is to challenge the entrenched doctrine of technological supremacy. For too long, global military spending has prioritized overwhelming, high-cost platforms like advanced destroyers, fighter jets, and complex, layered radar systems. The FP1 mission demonstrates conclusively that these massive, multi-billion-dollar systems possess critical, easily exploitable vulnerabilities to low-cost, low-signature threats. The challenge now is to shift the focus from preparing for the conventional threats of the past to actively anticipating and neutralizing the next generation of creative, low-cost, asymmetric attacks. This requires aggressively investing in asymmetric defense countermeasures that are specifically engineered to detect non-metallic, low-altitude, and thermally neutral targets, a complete overhaul of the foundational algorithms that currently dismiss such contacts as probable birds. The second critical CTA is to embrace and institutionalize low-tech innovation and expendability. The success of the FP1 was predicated on extreme resourcefulness born of necessity. The critical challenge for established global militaries is to create operational and acquisition environments that prioritize rapid, cheap, and disposable ingenuity over the slow, incredibly expensive, and complex procurement cycles that currently dominate defense spending. The focus must transition from a fear of failure to an acceptance of expendability, acknowledging the strategic reality that 1,000 disposable, cheap platforms can often achieve a decisive victory where a single, expensive platform cannot be risked. Finally, the CTA is to acknowledge the absolute supremacy of intelligence and electronic defense. The core strategic value of this story is not the small explosion, but the 6 weeks of predictive patterns that were destroyed. The enduring lesson is that the true high-value targets of modern conflict are overwhelmingly electronic. The centers of command, the intelligence-gathering arrays, and the data itself. Future defense efforts must focus relentlessly on protecting these electronic brains, not just the physical hulls. We must constantly ask ourselves, what is the next plywood solution that an ingenious adversary could deploy to defeat our most expensive and critical defense systems? By immediately embracing the profound lessons of the plywood phantom, the strategic power of deception, the genius of low-tech stealth, and the catastrophic danger of technological complacency, we can begin to prepare effectively for a future conflict that will be defined not by the size of the defense budget, but by the ultimate scale of the operational imagination. The Black Sea has provided the definitive instruction manual. The world must now decide if it will heed the call and learn from the silent, powerful phantom that irrevocably rewrote the rules of naval engagement.